Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Breakthrough Blueprint, where we talk to entrepreneurs about how they became successful. Today, I have my amazing friend Razib, and I'll hand it over to him to introduce himself.
Hey, my name is Razib Khan. I live here in Austin, Texas, and I'm director of operations at the consumer software company called Futo. And I also run a Substack called Razib Khan's Unsupervised Learning, where I talk about genetics, which is my original training in academia.
Amazing. And how did you get started in genetics, and what made you decide to focus on that?
Yeah. So when I was an undergrad, I was interested in biological sciences, kind of one of those like science kids. And there's different types of biology out there. And I majored in biochemistry because that's just kind of what you did back then, like with
Hmm.
molecular biology focus. But I noticed that I really like genetics. And the reason I like genetics is unlike other areas of biology, there's some memorization, but there's also like math and logic and algebra and just like thinking things through as opposed to just memorizing a bunch of facts. And so it's an area of biology where memorization is useful, but really you have to think deeply about issues as opposed to just regurgitating. And I don't want to dismiss areas like neuroscience and whatnot, but I mean, like okay, neuroscience is interesting, it's sexy, like, but it's basically like a bunch of stuff happens in the brain. We don't have a theory for it. With like genetics,
Hmm.
we understand the genetic mechanism of transmission and Mendelism and all these things and evolution in the broader sense. And so I really liked that it had like a big framework and you didn't need to memorize a bunch of stuff and you could use the science to make predictions about the world around you. And that's one of the most fun things about science for me.
Definitely. Okay, I love that. And can you talk a little bit about what you're doing now in your current role?
Yeah, yeah. So I'm director of operations, which is basically a management role at a tech company. Previously, I was a founder at a biotech company. And so I've kind of moved a little bit laterally. But the skills that I developed in terms of interacting with people at other companies, developing partnerships, talking to lawyers, raising funds, figuring out how marketing works, figuring out how to hire people, how to fire people. Those skills are still relevant across all domains. Obviously, I worked at several startups. I worked at startups for a decade now, and so I know how startups work and how equity works. I know the upsides, downsides, and whatnot. So I was recruited to join this company by the founder, who I was a social friend. I've known him for like almost 5 years now here in Austin, and as part of the Austin tech scene, you meet a lot of people, and they offer a lot of different opportunities. And this was a great opportunity. I believe in the vision of Futo. So the company basically, we're producing open source software that puts the customer first. We really are trying not to be evil, and we're seeing if people really care about that, as opposed to you become the product or whatever.
Interesting. Yeah, and it's funny because before I had met you, I had heard about the company because I don't know if you still do this, but they were hosting weekly lunches on
Oh, we still do it.
Fridays. Okay, great.
Every Friday at 2410 San Antonio at 1 p.m. We have food. We also do presentations now. Basically, there is going to be a Friday Futo, we call it, every Friday all year, unless uh, Friday happens to be Christmas. So basically, if there's like a really big holiday, a federal holiday, yeah, maybe we'll skip it, but otherwise we are gonna be. We met the day after Christmas.
Hmm.
We did it, and obviously the day after Thanksgiving, we did it. Thanksgiving's on Thursday. And so we just try to provide a space there for people that are interested in technology and entrepreneurship to meet every Friday and network and meet people. And, we do it as like a recruitment funnel too. It's by the campus.
Hmm.
Students love free food.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I've been wanting to go. I just, my days are kind of busy with everything, but at some point I'll make my way around. What do you guys present on during those meetings?
Yeah, so when we do presentation weeks, usually it's science and technology. So we present it on AI and consciousness, the Anaconda Python framework, for example, other things about artificial intelligence, vibe coding, open source software projects, hardware projects that we're interested in. It's a nerdy orientation. We're not going to give a presentation about some political topic, really,
Hmm.
even if
Hmm.
there's a political angle to it. But yeah, I think it's pretty representative of what I've told you. We did a Q&A with the quantum physicist Scott Aronson, who's a professor here at UT, a month ago, and that was really really a big hit.
Awesome. Yeah, I'll have to try to go to one of the next ones. So what are you most excited about working on this year, whether it with Budo or with your other ventures?
Yeah. Okay, there's a lot. So we started. This is kind of in stealth, but it's not like super stealth. We started a hardware project. When you sell software, obviously you're downloading things off the internet now. You back in the day, like I'm old enough to remember where software was like you get all these diskettes or you
Mhm.
got CDs, and now you just download stuff off the internet, right? Or like on the
Mhm.
computer or on your phone, from an app store. But when it comes to hardware, it's like you have a form factor. You're selling something, in a box, and so I'm kind of excited about that, just to like get involved in that sort of thing. In terms of my non tech Futo life, writing on the Substack. I do a podcast. I write on the Substack. There's a lot of things in ancient DNA and population genetics that are almost certainly going to be happening this year. And I'm really excited about that. I mean, I can tell you guys, like, I know that there's going to be a huge paper on Sephardic Jews and their origins that'll probably come out this year. Sephardic Jews are the Jews of Spain, and now they live in Morocco, Turkey, Syria, those type of places. So we understand their origins and how they relate to Ashkenazi Jews in this paper. I know a little bit about it because I know some of the researchers, and they gave me a preview. Should come out this year, and I'm gonna do a lot of writing on that.
Interesting. Is that related to the trip that you did recently to Israel?
No, so I went to Israel. It was sponsored by, the Herzl Institute, which is run by a conservative, political philosopher, Yoram Hazony, and it's basically the trip was to reconnect Americans, the people on the American right, I'm more conservative in my politics, to Israeli society and Israeli culture to trying to get their perspective. So, I went to Jerusalem,
Mhm.
went to Shiloh, went to Galilee, went to Tel Aviv, went to Gaza envelope, went to Bethlehem, which is outside of it's in the Palestinian zone,
Mhm.
Bethlehem is, but it's where Jesus Christ was born. And, went to the Church of the Nativity, saw where he was born, all these things. It was great. It's incredible amount of culture, incredible amount of history. The food is great in Israel, I do have to say. It's very, like, very light, high vegetable, a lot of vegetables, a lot of lean meats, fish. So, that was great. Overall, a lot of memories, a lot of experiences, and I can't, like, say too much about it. It's in terms of, like, how good it was. It was great.
Awesome. Yeah, I haven't been there yet. I definitely want to go, but that's great that you got that experience and probably fully paid VIP treatment everywhere.
Exactly.
That's awesome. And can you talk more about, like, I know my friends like Elena have mentioned like your Chinese dinner club dinners and things like that. Can you talk about that?
So, I've lived in Austin for a decade now, and I've developed some friends, and it's hard with our schedules to align a lot of the time. Uh,
Mhm.
right now, right now, the Trump administration is trying to do a lot of things bilaterally, which means nation to nation rather than as a group, and that can be actually kind of hard when you're trying to talk to this person, that person, and so I run kind of a little group where everybody organizes, figures out like optimally when to hang out, when to meet, and like we go have dinner, we hang out, go get some drinks, and just kind of like reconnect, like once every week or two.
Mhm.
For some people who are very busy, some people are heads down on their startup. Like this is one of the few social things they actually do, is what they've told me, because there's got to be like 20 to 40 people, and so they'll hang out with people that they know, people that they're friendly with. There's a
Mhm.
moderately diverse array of people, but it's an easy way to not have to think about it. You kind of like
Mhm.
take over the agency for people, and that works.
Yeah, that's really cool. I'd love to check that out sometime as well. And it's interesting because like I'm from LA originally, but when I moved to Austin, I've discovered like all these different subcultures, whether it's around like political or ideological beliefs. And then you cross over in so many different worlds of tech and VC. And I know you're back and forth between here and San Francisco as well. Like,
Yeah.
seems like you know everyone. You're like the unofficial mayor of Austin. So can you talk more about like, how these different parts of your lives kind of intersect and overlap and all of that?
Sure. I've lived. Austin's the longest place I've ever lived in my life. Actually, I've lived here on April 8th of 2026. It will be 10 years. So I've moved. I lived in Berkeley for about 4 years. I lived in Davis, California, for about 5 years. Before that, I lived in Oregon in various places. I grew up in Oregon. Before that, I lived in New York. Before that, I lived in a year in Pennsylvania. I was born in Bangladesh. We moved when I was 4. So back and forth everywhere, right? And so I, collected people, friends, over the years, and I
Mhm.
like to keep in touch and like see how they're doing. And as you get older, you see people get married, they have children, you see the stages of their life. That's great. Also, for professional reasons, it's good to keep in touch with people. You never know. I work in a startup, and I have hired multiple times at startups I've worked at. I've hired people that are personal connections. When you hire
Mhm.
someone that's a personal connection, they are more invested in you, and they're
Mhm.
much less likely to be very, very mercenary about you. There's some capital there besides just like the financial transaction. And so that to me is important. Like, I'm not saying that I only hire friends, but if you are a friend and you have a skill set that's aligned with what my company wants, and like, we could probably make a good deal together in terms of like,
Mhm.
I trust you more. You probably trust me not to screw you. So the professional and the personal definitely intersect that way. And then when you're at a startup person, we're not fundraising right now, but I
Mhm.
have done fundraising for other companies. For fundraising, you just got to network, you got to go to events, you got to go to parties. And
Yeah.
it's a situation where For fundraising or getting a job, I will tell you, I think, weak ties are in a way the best because if it's someone who's a close tie, you already know exactly what they can provide and they know what you need. And so everything's
Mhm.
probably already taken care of to the best of like what they can, do.
Mhm.
If it's someone you don't know, it's a situation where it's really hard to make the pitch. The best actual for like professional advancement, I would say, is usually a friend of a friend because they kind of know you, you have a personal connection,
Mhm.
but also you don't know each other well enough where you guys know all the opportunities that each other could provide. And so, like your concrete example, one of the guys that I hired, great employee. I met him at a conference. We didn't know each other, but we were introduced by a mutual friend. We both lived in Austin, and I was like, oh, let's hang. So he would go to Chinese, came to the Chinese dinner club, and then he started talking to me about my company, and we realized, oh, like he's got some skills that we could use, and he wasn't happy at the company that he was at. And so, we're just like, okay, like come on over. And so now he's working here, and that was just because we just randomly ran into each other at a conference and were introduced by a
Mhm.
mutual friend. This is a common thing. Fundraising is very similar. My last company, the biggest raise that we got was again through a friend of a friend. And it was somebody who was very aligned with the vision and
Mhm.
had not known about us and found out about us through a friend that they trusted.
Gotcha. Love that. That's amazing. Well, also, I'm amazed at how much energy you have because it seems like you're everywhere and you're doing so many things. Like, can you tell me about like what your daily routine looks like?
All right. Yeah. I mean, I am a high energy person. I've always been like that. I get it from my mom. She's not much of a sleeper. My dad is more normal. So usually I get up around like usually around like 7 o'clock. Obviously, I don't eat breakfast. And then, get my coffee. I start working. I usually work on my Substack. I do some writing, stuff like that. And then into the office after 9 o'clock. And then, I got meetings. I got stuff to do. I got lawyers to call. So I do operations. So that keeps going until about like, around 6 o'clock, a little after 6. And then, usually I get dinner. Like, I will get lunch in the middle of the day sometimes. Like, I'm trying to eat less. Get dinner, hang out with my friends. That's probably when you see me in like very social situations.
Mhm.
And then, depending on the situation, like if I go to sleep, if I'm home by like 10 or 11, I got some hours that I can like do writing, catching up on emails and stuff like that. People are always curious, like, oh, how do you get your Substack done? And it's because, like, I do it in the morning before I get to work, and I do it after I get home from like, hanging out, having dinner, hanging out with my friends. Sometimes, obviously, like it goes late, so I don't get the full day's work, so to speak. But yeah, that's the typical routine.
Mhm.
And also, like, Saturdays, like weekends, holidays are great for me because I can get a lot of writing done, a lot of work done. So I'm always let's just say that I don't veg. Let's put it that way. I do watch some things on Netflix, but not
Gotcha.
often. Not often. I
Mhm.
usually,
Mhm.
if I'm in front of the computer, I'm usually writing, recording podcasts, responding to emails,
Mhm.
etc.
Gotcha. And what is your goal with your Substack?
I enjoy writing about genetics. I enjoy spreading
Mhm.
it out to people, and make a good amount of money on it, to be honest. And so, the goal is to sustain it. And
Mm.
it's a situation where I've devoted a lot of my life to genetics, and I want to continue devoting my life
Mhm.
to genetics. I think about genetics. Like some people think about Rome every day. I think about Rome every day too,
It's your
but I think
Roman
about genetics
Empire.
every yeah, I think about genetics every day too, so, it's always gonna be a part of my life, and so, I think about technology every day too. I think about a lot of different things every day, and that's fine.
Mhm. Mhm.
Let's just say I have an active mind, and it's always thinking about.
What are one of the most passionate or interesting things about genetics that you're thinking about or writing about lately?
Yeah, I would say that I think one of the most interesting things that's happening in genetics and will be affect everyone's life in the near future is, about maybe a little less, but around half of people out there will die of cancer, right? A little less than half. Heart disease and other things. There's other things out there, but cancer is a big deal. And cancer is basically when your cells are going crazy and they don't go through their like birth life process. It's like uncontrolled growth. A lot of this happens due to genetic mutations. Now, some of those genetic
Mhm.
mutations are at birth, but a lot of them happen later in life through some chemical exposure, maybe. That's the stereotypical one. Sometimes stuff just happens randomly, okay? There's like no reason.
Mhm.
Okay, so as a geneticist, obviously you're interested in this. Now, the way chemotherapy works, now chemotherapy's gotten better and better, but the way
Mhm.
chemotherapy works is it kills your cells. And so it almost kills you. And that's why the hair falls out and all these things, right? There is the possibility in the near future that we will be able to genetically sequence the genome of a cancer line.
Mhm.
So imagine you metastasize into your cancerous tissue. They get some cells out and they sequence it and they see exactly what mutations are in your genes, right?
Mhm.
And what's causing the cancer. And then you develop drugs that are targeted towards the biochemical processes that are breaking due to those mutations. So all of a sudden, chemo doesn't have to be, let's almost kill you. Like
Mhm.
chemo can be targeted. And so I think that's
Mm.
one of the things I love to tell people. There can be a near future where genetics enables us to target exactly onto what problems the cancer is caused. Because the issue with cancer, like when you have breast cancer, for example, I just like give it, cancer is defined by its tissue. But
Mm.
everybody's breast cancer, like, okay, there are some mutations like BRCA, it's a very common mutation, but like there's a lot of different types of breast cancer because there's a lot of different types of mutations and a lot of different
Mhm.
origins, right? And so that's why when we say breast cancer, the phenomenon is like one thing, the output is one thing, but its causes are actually all varied. They're all very different things. And that's why we have such kludgy chemotherapies because
Mm.
you can't target it if you don't know how they're different, right? So
Mhm.
genetic sequencing of cancerous lineages can help tell us how you want to target it, how you want to like narrow focus, defeat the disease.
Mhm. Mhm. Interesting. Very interesting. I'm curious then what's your perspective on like alternative cancer treatments like the keto diet or like Joe Dispenza's sort of philosophy on like manifestation?
Yeah, I know. So, like, I think the diet stuff. I think there's some interesting stuff there. I'm not like super versed on it. I think people need to be careful. They don't need to go all whole hog. But I think there are things related to environment and stuff you put into your body that almost certainly affects our cancerous growth and development of cancer. The issue is there's not that much study on it. Partly because again, it's like this huge phenomenon that's not well classified. And how are you going to like you know track someone's diet that well? I think there are just issues with how the studies are. Designed. Just because something is not like scientifically proven in a study doesn't mean it's not real. Actually, there are things that have been proven later in scientific study that were known for decades. So a lot of traditional wisdom turns out to be true, right? Not all the time, but some of the time. And so I'm not going to give like a one size fits all answer to that. I will say, for example, like Steve Jobs famously did a lot of naturopathic treatments
Mhm.
for his, I think, pancreatic cancer. Probably that hastened his death because it metastasized further than it would have if he had aggressively targeted it with conventional allopathic medicine, right? And so you have to be careful about that. I think probably there are things related to diet. I mean, this is actually pretty well known. There are things related to diet and your body, like your obesity and all these other things that affect your
Mhm.
propensity to cancer. So, for example, Japanese women have much lower rates of breast cancer than Japanese American women. What was the difference there? There's something in the environment that's different.
Mhm. Mhm.
Whether it's like, lifestyle, whether it's what they eat, whether it's what they're exposed to. And we just don't know all the details to that yet. I think someday we will, but that's going to be like the work of generations.
What's your opinion on services like 20?
So I worked for the co-founder of 23andMe. I think it's great
Hmm.
service. The issue with she got pushed out in 2010, so it was a long time ago. 23andMe is great service. They tried to promise a little too much. Also, Anne Wojcicki, the founder who remained, her vision, she just had a problem focusing, and she kept pivoting and changing. And so ultimately, what happened was interest rates increased. Like they couldn't like fund the company, so they actually had it was financial mismanagement less than scientific mismanagement. The science is there. It's not perfect. She did overpromise somewhat, but 23andMe's failure as a company, it is now a nonprofit, like it's been reorganized, but its failure as a company was really financial mismanagement because the interest rates were just way too high for them to service their debt. That's fundamentally what happened.
Mhm. Mhm.
And this is common with a lot of biotech companies in the last couple of years. We had a period of
Gotcha.
really low interest rates, cheap money, and once the money got more expensive, they could not actually manage their revenue and their costs anymore.
Mhm.
Nor could they raise money. Once interest rates gets, once the interest rates like become high enough, no one's going to be lending money anymore, or far fewer.
Yeah, I mean, definitely I understand like that environment has changed over the last few years just being in Austin and hearing about people. There's so many founders here, obviously.
Yeah.
But I guess what is your opinion on where things will go with like this AI bubble and like the heavy investment into data centers and everything all the conversation about that?
So I think AI is real. I think the bubble is a bubble, although bubbles often exist when there's something real underneath it.
Mhm.
I I think AI will be transformative. I don't think that human civilization will end in 5 years. I don't think that 50% of people will be unemployed. AI is going to do a lot of things and help a lot of things. I think AI is probably honestly going to make us more in like the next decade or so. It'll just make us more productive. That's what I think.
Mhm.
There's going to
Mhm.
be some changes on the margin, translators, for example, and stuff. are having issues, getting work. But yeah, AI is a real deal. LLMs are the real. AI has been around for a while. It's really like
Mhm,
transformers
mhm,
and LLMs that have changed everything. And I think they're going to transform our lives. But a lot of these technologies, we overestimate their short-term impact and underestimate their long-term impact. And I think that's true of AI as well.
mhm. Interesting. And I'm curious if you know of any other fun facts you can share with us similar to that paper you were discussing about the origin of Sephardic Jews. Do you know anything about, the origins of other peoples all around the world that Mhm,
Anyone who wants to so my Substack is Razib on supervised learning. Just check it out. I have like a lot of different peoples.
mhm,
What's interesting? I mean, there's just so many things. So a one thing is that so people in the Amazon and like in South America, indigenous people, they have ancestry from a population that's more closely related somehow. They're mostly the same as other Native Americans, but they also have ancestry from a population that's most closely related to Australian Aborigines, and nobody really
mm,
understands how that happened. Probably what it is most Native American ancestry comes from a group of people that came over the Bering Strait land bridge 15,000 years, 15, 16,000 years ago. But probably it looks like very likely that there were earlier people here. We don't know anything about them and where they came from. So this is like an area of investigation. It looks like a lot of those sites are actually underwater because
mhm,
sea levels
mhm,
rose since the ice age. And it turns out it could be like these are just like maritime, marine oriented peoples. And that's why we didn't understand them. So Native Americans are, not the first peoples actually of the New World. They are possibly the second or third peoples. So I mean, I think that's an interesting fact. Also, different populations have been replaced a lot over history. One area that's not true, it turns out, is China, where it looks
mm,
like over the last like 12,000 years, there's been continuity on the North China Plain. So the foragers, like the hunter gatherers, like adopted farming, and then they expanded. But it's the same people, which is a little different than in Europe or India or the Middle East, where there's been a lot of changes. So that
mhm,
to me is interesting. We don't know why those differences exist. I think a lot of the differences there have to do with like ecology. China is just a big place, and it never got as cold as, say, for example, Europe. So a lot of people didn't die. So I think it had like a
mhm.
larger starting population. I think that's what it is.
Interesting. So, I mean, obviously, you know a lot about then, like, probably archaeology, sociology, just like the history of peoples, not just from
Yeah,
genetics.
I mean, archaeology, like it's tough, man. Like a lot of archaeology though is just like floor plans. I'm just like, it's like some ancient village, and all that's left is like the foundation. So they're like floor plans. But yeah, I know a fair amount. I mean, I picked up some stuff. Yeah, I've never taken a class in archaeology, but pottery, like corded
Mhm,
ware, all these names, I know the names now, and so you have to know enough to kind of make your
mhm,
way through. It's like kind of like
mhm,
I would say archaeology is like a little bit like the steel frame of a skyscraper, and then for me, genetics is like filling in all the mortar and all the glass and everything like that, right? Archaeology is
mhm,
the skeleton, and I use that skeleton to like figure out the genetics, right?
mhm, mhm. Yeah, because I've spent a lot of time in Mexico City. It's kind of like my other home base, and I went to the Museum of Anthropology in Mexico City. Have you been there?
No, no.
It's amazing. It's my favorite museum in the world. I highly recommend it for anybody, but I just learned so much just about all the peoples, not just in Mexico, but in that whole region that have lived there, and it's amazing how many artifacts they were able to recover because the Spanish, demolished. But yeah, it's just amazing like how many artifacts they were able to recover despite the fact that the Spanish had purposefully destroyed so many things that they found. They're still able to recover things, even things that were broken to a million pieces and put them back together. So I definitely learned a lot and have a lot of respect.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about archaeology is like, unlike linguists, they are studying something that leaves a lot of remains no matter how much you try to destroy it. And actually, some of the best archaeological remains are like cities that have been burned because it freezes everything in place.
Mhm.
So it's like it freezes everything in place. Obviously, does destroy a lot, but it creates
Mhm.
like this layer that you can analyze later. So that's the irony of
Mhm.
that. Some cities that have been continuously occupied are actually quite difficult. So, like Jerusalem has a lot of
Mhm.
archaeology, but one of the problems is Jerusalem has been occupied for 4,000 straight years.
Mhm.
And so, like, what are you gonna do? Like, you're gonna like unearth this? Are you gonna like tear down this building to like do a dig? No, no. So it's like it's kind of ideal in a lot of ways that the city be plundered and then abandoned.
Yeah, from that
That's weird to say, but it's
perspective,
true.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Gotcha. Where are some of the your favorite places that you've traveled to then in terms of from this perspective?
Obviously Jerusalem was a big deal. Rome, I've been to Italy, Italy and the Middle East so far.
Mhm.
I
Mhm.
haven't been too many other places that have had like very, very old remains. I would probably like to go to Peru, check out, the Inca remains at some point.
Mhm.
And then, Maybe Japan. Japan has like
Mhm.
ancient pottery, ancient sites. Just
Mhm.
the Jomon people, like very unique and distinctive. So, yeah, those are the places that I want to go to. And like in terms of where I've been, definitely like Rome and Jerusalem were like two amazing.
Amazing. And I think that you had also mentioned that you have in the past, or you're still an advisor on the board of other companies, or
Yeah, there's some AI companies I'm on the board of,
okay.
and it's like people need advice and contacts. I mean, advisors do different things. Some people like have like weekly meetings.
Mhm.
Other places, they just really want you to like be on the website and maybe like be a contact for fundraising
Mhm.
and business
Mhm.
partnership, right? And so advising means a lot of different things, and it's usually
Mhm.
you're paid in like some equity shares or
Mhm.
whatever. I mean, I don't. Some advisors take cash. I don't take cash. There's no point.
Interesting. Okay. And then so what are some of your favorite companies or, products that you've worked on or advised on?
Yeah. Well, I've worked on a fair number of genetics projects. I think the one I'll highlight is it's been almost a decade, but I was one of the first employees at Embark, which is a genetic testing company for
Mhm.
dogs. Now, the breed stuff is interesting, but what's really interesting, and I worked on a lot on, is disease prediction, which works really well in dogs because a lot of them, frankly, are inbred. And so
Mhm.
I think that this is like something where you pay $100 and you know what diseases your dog is going to get. And I think that's useful because obviously dogs can't communicate. And so like they don't always tell you what's going on with them. But if you
Mhm.
know if your
Mhm.
dog is like likely to get some type of cancer or maybe some
Mhm.
heart issue, I think that's important. Actionable
Yeah,
information is the term I think they would say.
definitely. Great. Well, I guess just to wrap things up here, what are you most excited about this year, either in your personal or professional life?
Well, as I said, like, I think Futo's going to do a hardware project. I'm really
Mhm.
excited about that progressing. I'm just like kind of brainstorming, figuring out like what's going on with that. And, it'll be 10 years in Austin. Hopefully, this will be a good decade. And then I want to, visit my sister lives on the East Coast. Want to visit her more, visit my niece and nephew a bit more, go back to the
Mhm.
West Coast, see my kids more. So personally, yeah, I just travel with a purpose, I guess is what I'm saying.
Amazing. Love that. And just parting words, do you have any advice for people that want to do anything that you're doing?
You should do something, and this is cliche. You need to do something you're passionate about. Otherwise, there's no point. You know,
Love
it's, don't
that.
don't do it. Don't do it for the money. Don't do it for the connections. Don't do it for the fame. That's not going to lead you anywhere.
Mhm. Mhm. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining me.
It was my pleasure.
For everyone else, tune into the next episode of the Breakthrough Blueprint.